The Clone Wars tore the Galactic Republic apart on an unprecedented scale due to the secession of countless thousands of member systems. Before that, the Republic had largely ruled the galaxy undisputed for thousands of years, with the only major exceptions most fans know of being during the wars with the Sith. But was the Clone Wars the first civil war the Republic faced? The answer, in fact, is no. In this fourth installment of our Republic History series, we're going to be taking a look at the first civil war that split the Republic and why the galaxy was never the same again.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Now, it's been a hot second since we've done a video in this series, so you might need a quick bit of a recap before we begin. If that's the case, or if you haven't watched any of the prior videos in this series, we recommend you go and watch the first 3 now. In our first video, we discussed the Unification Wars and the formation of the Republic. In the second, we discussed how the Jedi joined the Republic and their first major clash with the dark side, and in the third, we discussed the Tyon Cluster and the Republic's first war. When we last left off in this series, we discussed the Tynese War and the subsequent integration of the Tyon Cluster into the Republic, as well as the end of the first chapter of Republic history. By the end of the expansionist era, the Republic had fully explored and incorporated large swaths of the core worlds, the colonies, and the Inner Rim, and was developing further out into the galactic disk along the Polemian trade route and the Corellian Run. With the conquest of the Tyon Cluster, the Republic stretched out far into the Rim along the Polemian Run, and by 20,000 BBY, the Corellian Run had been heavily developed as well. At that point in time, explorers were instead turning their attention to the wide chunk of space between the two routes, a region nicknamed the Slice. Starting in 20,000 BBY, scouts began pouring into the Slice, heralding the beginning of a new chapter in Republic history, the Great Manifest Period. This period saw the Republic expand dramatically, both in astrographic and bureaucratic terms. It was during this period that many of the Republic's most infamous flaws, including its massively convoluted bureaucratic process and constant Senate gridlock, began to take root, as Republic space was expanding faster than the Senate could keep up with it. As a result, many sectors were far larger than they were legally supposed to be, limiting representation for newer colonies. This era also saw the creation of the Bureau of Ships and Services in 18,000 BBY, a powerful organization that controlled hyperspace navigation across the entirety of galactic civilization. Galactic exploration during the Great Manifest period was largely pushed by 3 powerful core worlds in particular: Coruscant, Alsakan, and Corellia. Coruscant, the Republic capital and hub of galactic civilization, coordinated the exploration of the Slice from the Corellian Run, of which it was the endpoint, discovering many new species and welcoming them into the Republic. Corellia pushed into the wild space south of the core, while Alsakan funded colonization efforts northwards from the Polemian trade spine. Significant cultural differences emerged between the worlds explored by Alsakan, those explored by Coruscant, and those explored by Corellia, resulting in the early Republic developing not as one civilization, but as 3. By the end of the Great Manifest period, shortly before 17,000 BBY, the Republic was significantly larger than it had been at the end of the expansionist era. However, it was beginning to fracture as a result of these tensions. Alsakan, the home of a proud people with a distinct culture, had been Coruscant's biggest rival in the years before the Republic. They had wanted the Republic to be more of a confederation, a looser union than it eventually became, fearing their culture would be lost otherwise. As the Great Manifest period went on and the Republic became more consolidated and bureaucratic, the Alsakani began to see these fears coming true. Alsakan itself was becoming just another stop on the Polemian, a rest point between Coruscant and Anaxis. As a result, Alsakan was constantly trying to upstage Coruscant, dominating colonization efforts along the Polemian trade route, which the Alsakani called the Axis. Alsakani explorers pushed the borders of wild space in the Slice southwards, discovering worlds like Seleucami and Laurel, and they also funded northwards expansion of the Republic, colonizing Palanhi, Bogdan, Obraskai, and Sirocco. That latter region, the northern dependencies, became particularly loyal to Alsakan, and many Polemian worlds, including the Tyon cluster, came to reflect Alsakani views on the Republic as well. Coruscant, meanwhile, took advantage of the expansion of the Corellian run, which by that point stretched out to Mon Gaza in the Mid-Rim, and had reached the vital trade worlds of Cherba and Pakwapor Minor as well. The Grand Companies, a group of corporations on Coruscant and Coruscant loyal worlds along the Spin, the stretch of the Corellian run between Corellia and Coruscant, dominated the colonization process, which they used to exploit newly discovered worlds. From Mon Gaza, Coruscanti and Corellian explorers pushed into the Outer Rim, discovering Geonosis, Shimba, and Manda in the space beyond the end of the run. They also made contact with other spacefaring civilizations, including the Bothans and the Lenik. More importantly, however, they pushed northwards into the Slice, opening up the expansion region and then the Mid-Rim. Thousands of worlds were discovered by the Coruscant-backed scout ships, with notable ones including Umbara, Belasco, Telti, Cerilia, and New Absalon. Many of the worlds discovered in the expansion region were rich in natural resources, and so the Grand Companies took control of these planets and began stripping them. Critics began calling one particular swath of the expansion region the exploitation region because of how badly the corporations were treating the systems there. Indeed, many of the worlds were exploited so badly that they were rendered unable to support life and were subsequently abandoned. By the time of the Clone Wars, the exploitation region was considered dead space, with few habitable worlds and even fewer hyperspace routes left in the area. Corellia, meanwhile, just kind of did its own thing south of the Corellian run. It, too, had significant cultural influence over the Republic, with a stretch of the run known as the 77 sectors, and pretty much all systems south of the route taking after Corellia on most matters. Unlike Alsakan though, it wasn't really bothered by the Republic expansion or Coruscant's growing dominance. The Corellians just stuck to doing what they did best, exploring. As Coruscant began to slowly take over the Corellian run, the Corellians began forging a new hyperspace route, the Corellian Trade Spine, which they extended from its former endpoint at Deveron far out into wild space. They settled the region between the run and the Trade Spine, and they also pushed out into the southern core, eventually coming up against the borders of the Herglic Trade Empire. By the end of the 17,000s, exploration was beginning to slow down, and the Great Manifest period was coming to a close. This heightened tensions between Alsakan and Coruscant as the Republic began to seek greater authority over Alsakani colonies. Things finally came to a head in 17,018 BBY, when Alsakan and its allies sent fleets south into the expansion region, claiming several resource-rich systems and blocking the Grand Company's expansion path. The Grand Company sent a fleet of heavily armed Duros merchant freighters in response, which opened fire on the Alsakani warships above several colonies. The Republic, following Coruscant's lead, resolved to officially support the Duros, and a civil war began. Thus, the Great Manifest period came to an end, and the Indecta era began, starting with the first Alsakan conflict. In total, there were 17 Alsakan conflicts between 17,018 BBY and 3,017 BBY, though we'll only be discussing the first two today. These were the first civil wars faced by the Republic, though they weren't the sort of civil war we're familiar with. Instead of drawn-out campaigns and extended periods of bloody infighting, the Alsakan conflicts mostly consisted of saber-rattling, with a few notable battles here and there. The Republic largely continued on as usual during them, with the many neutral systems serving as bridges between the warring parties, and thus leaving business mostly unaffected. The first Alsakan conflict saw several clashes between various Republic fleets and Alsakani warships, beginning with the Republic invasion of Virujansi, a world that, at the time, was occupied by Alsakan. The Republic successfully captured Virujansi, but Alsakan reclaimed the world in a second battle 6 years later, from which its warships would continue to launch raids on the exploitation region. After the battles of Virujansi, what started as a small-scale conflict between Alsakan and Coruscant's Spin allies dragged more and more systems into it, with the northernmost parts of the civilized galaxy largely siding with Alsakan and the rest of the Republic siding with Coruscant. Corellia, however, remained neutral, and the parts of the Republic south of the Karelian Run sided with it, forming the Karelian hegemony. There was only one full-scale battle in this centuries-long First Alsakan conflict, the Battle of Kess in 16,921 BBY, an orbital clash above the Sol system unfortunate enough to lie between Coruscant and Alsakan on the Polemian. That battle ended in a draw, as orbital minefields made that part of space impossible to navigate, thwarting Republic plans to attack Alsakan directly and end the conflict. 40 years later, Republic-backed merchant fleets besieged the Alsakani colony of Porus Vita, ultimately conquering the world for the Republic. The Alsakani responded in kind in around 16,800 BBY with the siege of Belasco, an unsuccessful attempt to conquer what was then one of the most crucial hyperspace junctions in the expansion region. The first Alsakan conflict dragged on like a crappy hollow drama the producers just wouldn't cancel, ending in 16,700 BBY only because the Bureau of Ships and Services threatened to withhold navigational data from warships if it didn't. Coruscant and Alsakan worked out the Chalet Compromise in a bid to diminish tensions, which granted established Republic worlds more power in the Senate. This brought peace for a little while, but it also worsened the Senate corruption, which in turn led to war breaking out again just 500 years later. The second Alsakan conflict picked up where the first had left off, with the Alsakani attempting a second siege of Porus Vita in about 16,100 BBY, unsuccessfully trying to reclaim their lost colony. The Republic responded by pressing its advantage, beginning the Geyser campaign, which advanced from Porus Vita toward Geyser, an Alsakani stronghold on the Polemian. The Republic made some gains, but the Alsakani still managed to maintain control of Geyser itself in a series of skirmishes that concluded the campaign in 16,000 BBY. Most of the second Alsakan conflict consisted of an arms race, with a period of 400 years having no notable battles or clashes of any kind. This period ended about 15,600 years before the Battle of Yavin, with Alsakan's core campaigns, in which fleets of Alsakani warships advanced toward Republic-held Coruscant, Skako, and Komeno. Alsakan was quickly pushed back by Republic forces at Skako and Komeno, and the Republic kept the Alsakani from attacking Coruscant in a battle at Belgoth's Beacon, a historical site that was one of the Republic's first hyperspace beacons. Belgoth's Beacon was destroyed in the battle, becoming one of the many historical treasures that, regrettably, would be lost in the conflicts. Shortly afterwards, in 15,500 BBY, the second Alsakan conflict was put on pause when hyperspace scouts discovered Dwinalgwyn, a reptilian species commonly known as star dragons, near Mokana in the Tyon cluster. Upon encountering a race of 50-meter-long dragon-like creatures that could survive in space and breathe atomic fire, the scouts naturally freaked out, unintentionally starting the Dwinalgwyn contention. The scouts ran all the way back to Coruscant, and hundreds of star dragons followed. They ravaged Galactic City, but Supreme Chancellor Felorian was able to put a stop to this destruction and negotiate peace with the star dragon philosopher Bors Mator. The contention ended with the star dragons peacefully acknowledging the Republic, and the second Alsakan conflict continued, though not for long. The last major strike in the second conflict was the Strontium raid of 15,480 BBY, in which Alsakan attempted to capture Abian, a Republic-loyal world on the Polemian. The strike was unsuccessful and the second Alsakan conflict fizzled out in around 15,400 BBY. As the Indector era came to a close around 15,000 BBY, tensions from the second Alsakan conflict still simmered. These two conflicts were the first civil wars the Republic ever faced, but not the last. Alsakan and Coruscant would continue to clash, leading to long-standing prejudices and rivalries to develop between their worlds. Some of these prejudices would later blossom into conflicts of the Clone Wars, the long-term consequence of the first Alsakani secessions. As the Republic continued to expand, the Alsakan conflicts continued, even as explorers from both Alsakan and Coruscant began to reach the borders of another civilization out in the unknown, the Hutt Empire. We'll talk about all of that and more next week in our video on the history of the Republic. But what do you think? Would you have supported the merchant fleets of Coruscant, the ancient seppies of Alsakan, or their isolationist Corellians? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below. And just before you click on the next suggested video of how to pick up a Twi'lek at a bar, make sure you check out our new channel called The Braved. We go through all different eras of history to find some of the most badass individuals and tell their story in a real high quality way. I'm sure you guys will love that channel, so make sure you check it out. And if you're more keen on the music, we also have our Relax Jack music channel where we post awesome pieces of music weekly, a lot of which we use in the videos here. And if you want access to a behind the scenes Discord and some exclusive content, consider donating to our Patreon. And if you want to join our wider community, join us on our Geetsly's gaming network and our main Geetsly's Discord server. All those links and more are in the description below. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.